My name is Alara Vance. I was 29 when everything fell apart in a single evening. It happened at my father's 60th birthday dinner, a night that should have been filled with nothing but warmth. The table was crowded with relatives, the smell of roasted chicken filling the room, voices layered with laughter and clinking glasses. I remember feeling calm, even a little proud, watching my dad laugh with friends who had known him for decades. Then he leaned across the table, his eyes soft but troubled. His voice cut through the chatter like a blade. "Alara, the $200,000, what did you end up doing with it?" My fork slipped from my hand and clattered against the plate. For a moment I thought I had misheard him. "Dad, what 200,000? I asked. My throat tightened as the words came out. Across from me, my sister Bryn turned pale, her fingers twitching against her wine glass. Her face looked frozen, like someone caught in the middle of a crime. The laughter died around us. The silence pressed against my chest so hard I could hardly breathe. I searched the room for help, but everyone avoided my eyes. My mother lowered her gaze, fiddling with the edge of a napkin. My aunt, sitting near the end of the table, watched closely, her expression sharp and knowing. I could feel something terrible beginning to surface, something that would not be easy to escape. My father was still looking at me, waiting for an answer I couldn't give. I felt heat rush up my neck, and the longer I sat there, the clearer it became. This wasn't a mistake. Something was wrong, and Bryn knew it. She shifted in her chair, lips parting as if to speak, but no sound came. Her hands trembled as she pushed her glass away. I wanted to demand the truth from her right there, but my voice was locked inside me. That night, under the golden light of the chandelier, I realized my family wasn't what I thought it was. Secrets had been moving beneath the surface, and I was about to learn how far betrayal could reach. For years I worked in Seattle, sitting at a desk in a loud office, making ads that never felt like mine. I stayed late most nights, sketching ideas in the margins of my notebook, dreaming about one day running my own design studio. That dream always felt far away until my father surprised me. Without warning, he wired me a large sum of money, enough to finally step away from other people's visions and build my own. "Use it to create something lasting," he had told me, and for the first time, I believed it was possible. I started searching for spaces in Denver, wanting to be closer to him and the rest of the family. I walked through empty lofts and dusty storefronts, imagining them filled with my drawings and work tables. Each place I visited made the idea more real. I felt ready, like I was standing at the edge of a new life. Then the phone rang one afternoon. It was Bryn. Her voice shook as if she had just been crying. She said Dad wasn't well, that his birthday celebration had been canceled, and there was no need for me to fly back. Her words sounded wrong, too rehearsed, and the way she rushed to end the call left me unsettled. Dad never left news like that for someone else to deliver. He would have spoken to me himself. I couldn't ignore the feeling growing in my chest. Something wasn't adding up. I booked a ticket that night and packed a small bag, making sure to bring the gift I had chosen weeks before, a polished pen set engraved with his initials. I wanted to hand it to him in person, even if the gathering had been called off. When my flight landed in Denver, I headed straight for his house in Cherry Creek. The neighborhood looked the same, tree-lined and quiet, but as the car turned onto his street, my stomach twisted. His driveway was packed with shiny cars, and lights blazed from every window. Music drifted through the air, mixing with voices and laughter. I stared at the scene, gripping the gift in my lap. Bryn's words replayed in my head, sharp and false. She had told me there was no party, that Dad was too ill to host anyone. Yet his home was full of guests, the sound of celebration spilling onto the street. The truth was in front of me, undeniable. I had been lied to, and the lie was not small. It was deliberate, meant to keep me away. My chest tightened as I stepped out of the car, the cool night air biting at my skin. With each step toward the glowing house, I carried not just the gift for my father, but also the heavy knowledge that my sister had hidden something from me. The moment I stepped through the doorway, the sound of laughter wrapped around me, thick and sharp. Glasses clinked, music floated through the rooms, and the smell of rich food filled the air. My father stood near the center of it all, smiling easily, leaning on no one, his face bright and strong. There was nothing sick about him. The Libran had fed me only hours before unraveled instantly. I held the pen set close to my chest, not sure if I should stay or turn back. But he spotted me before I could decide. His eyes lit up, and in seconds I was caught in his arms, his voice warm with surprise. He thanked me for coming as though nothing strange had happened, his cheer genuine, making me feel even more like an intruder. Across the room, Bryn froze. She had been laughing with a group near the fireplace, but the moment her gaze landed on me, the color drained from her face. She didn't greet me. She simply turned, her shoulders stiff, her hands busying themselves with a glass she didn't drink from. Her silence said more than words could have. My mother bustled between guests, offering small plates, her smile fixed but unsteady. Each time I tried to catch her eye, she looked away, almost flinching. It was as though she couldn't bear to see me standing there, proof that whatever game they were playing had failed. I found myself pushed into casual conversations with neighbors I barely knew, each one making comments about how wonderful Bryn looked, how radiant she was these days. Their words sliced deeper when I noticed her dress, a silk piece that gleamed under the lights, paired with jewelry too fine to be new on a modest salary. She spun slowly as she walked, ensuring everyone noticed her, though her eyes kept darting nervously toward me. Then Aunt Margot slipped to my side. She was never one to hold her tongue, and her sharp gaze told me she'd been waiting for this moment. Her voice was low but firm, carrying the bite of someone who had seen too much. She muttered about Bryn's sudden splurges, how she'd been flashing expensive handbags around town like prizes. She arched a brow at me as if daring me to ignore what was obvious. I listened, my stomach twisting tighter. It wasn't just the lie about the party. It was bigger, something spreading underneath all of them. Their smiles, their chatter, their polished clothes. It was a performance. And I was not part of the script. I tried to steady myself, to blend into the crowd, but everywhere I looked there was another reminder that I didn't belong. The decorations glowed, the guests laughed, but the warmth slid off me like water off glass. I was no guest here, no daughter being welcomed home. I was the shadow at the edge of their perfect picture, and they all felt it. That night, as I stood in my father's crowded home with a gift still clutched in my hand, I understood the truth. My presence was unwanted, and the reason for Bryn's lie was more dangerous than I had guessed. When the candles melted into smoke and the last cheer faded, the dining room grew still. Glasses were lifted, and Dad rose with his voice steady as he thanked everyone for being there. His smile looked real, but then he turned to me, and I saw a change in his face, something sharper, something searching. "Elara," he said, and the chatter around us dissolved. His tone was quiet, but it carried weight. "Tell me, what did you do with the 200,000 I transferred to you?" The words didn't make sense at first. My breath caught. I thought I must have misheard him, but the table had already stiffened, forks frozen in midair. I stared at him, my pulse loud in my ears. 200,000? I asked, my voice small. "I don't know what you're talking about. I never received that." A stunned silence swept the room. Then Bryn spoke, her tone brittle, rushed, almost too quick. She said I must have forgotten, that I always mix things up. The defense was so clumsy it made the silence heavier. Dad turned his gaze on her, his expression hardening. The lie in her voice was impossible to miss. He looked back at me, his eyes narrowing. "I sent money to each of you. Equal amounts. Not the funds for your business. This was separate, for your own future. Are you saying none of it reached you?" I could only shake my head, my throat tightening. The truth pressed down on me, heavy and cold. My eyes fell on Bryn. Her face had drained of color, and her hands twisted in her lap. She didn't need to confess. Her fear said enough. Around us, the guests sat rigid, uncomfortable, pretending to sip their drinks while watching everything unfold. No one dared move. My mother pressed her napkin to her mouth, her shoulders hunched as though she wanted to vanish into the chair. The air thickened until even the chandelier lights felt harsh, exposing every flicker of unease. I felt tears gathering, but I held them back. It wasn't just the missing money. It was the realization that someone in my own family had made sure it never reached me. Dad's jaw tightened, his calm masking something deeper. His questions had ripped away the glossy surface of the evening. Nothing about the laughter, the music, or the celebration mattered anymore. All that existed was the weight of that missing sum and the unspoken truth hanging between me and my sister. In that instant, with everyone watching, the ground shifted under me. What should have been an ordinary toast had cracked open something hidden, and I knew nothing in that house would be the same again. The silence after my father's question felt endless. He fixed his eyes on Bryn, his expression firm, his tone leaving no room to hide. She shifted in her seat, fumbling for words, her voice breaking as she tried to explain. She spoke of savings accounts, investments, complicated terms that didn't sound like her. The stammer in her voice betrayed her, each excuse thinner than the last. My father's patience snapped. His voice rose, not in confusion but in fury, cutting through the air with a sharpness no one could ignore. He brought up her lavish shopping, the expensive things she had flaunted so carelessly. His anger rolled over the table, and suddenly no guest dared to move or speak. Forks lay untouched, glasses half lifted. All eyes were on Bryn. I turned toward my mother, searching for clarity, hoping she would stop this from becoming worse. Instead, she folded in on herself, her words spilling out unevenly. She admitted they had tried to cover Bryn's mistakes, that debts had piled too high, that this seemed like the only way to keep her afloat. She confessed it as though the act were small, a favor, something temporary. But the weight of it pressed against me, heavy and sharp. The truth settled like a storm cloud. My chest tightened as I realized the money meant for me had been drained away to patch holes in Bryn's reckless life. They hadn't just made a mistake. They had chosen her over me, taken what was mine to shield her from consequences she created. My father's hands trembled, not with weakness but with contained rage. He pulled his phone from his pocket, his voice calm in a way that frightened me more than his shouts. He said this wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't an accident. It was theft. His fingers moved across the screen, the quiet taps louder than any argument. Gasps rose from around the room, whispers darting between guests who wished they weren't there. Some looked at me with pity, others at Bryn with disbelief. No one reached out to stop what was happening. No one dared. Bryn's face collapsed, her polished mask gone. She begged under her breath, her words tripping over each other. Her eyes searched for support, first from my mother, then from me, but neither of us could save her. My mother reached toward my father, pleading softly, but he pulled back unshaken. The warmth that once filled that dining room was gone. The glow of candles and clinking of silver had turned into a courtroom, with my father as judge and jury. The celebration had ended, replaced by something cold and irreversible. That was the moment I knew the damage could not be undone. What had been hidden in shadows was out in the open, and the people I trusted most had placed me last. The ride to the station felt unreal. The flashing lights outside the window, the hum of tires on pavement, the heavy silence inside the car, everything pressed in on me. I sat across from Bryn and my mother, both pale, both avoiding my eyes. My father was stone-faced, speaking only when necessary, his jaw tight as though every word cost him effort. Inside the station, the fluorescent lights were harsh, stripping away any last shred of comfort. We were ushered into a small room with plain walls and a metal table. An officer began asking questions, his tone flat and professional. Piece by piece, the truth came out, each detail cutting deeper than the last. They explained how Bryn had managed it. The account my father had created for both of us, meant as a safeguard for our futures, had been left accessible. My mother admitted she had given Bryn the details, insisting she thought it was just for a short while, just until things settled. Hearing her say it aloud was worse than I had imagined. It wasn't an accident, it wasn't some outside mistake. It had been a choice. The officer clicked through records, his voice steady as he read out where the money had gone. Flights to distant islands. Resort stays. A shiny car that had turned heads in the driveway. Piles of purchases from luxury stores. Each line item felt like a slap, the numbers running higher and higher until I could barely listen anymore. When he finally stopped, the total remaining was barely anything. A small fraction sat untouched, a drop compared to what had vanished. My chest felt hollow. All the hours I had spent planning, all the ideas I had mapped for my studio, all the dreams I thought were safe, gone in an instant, burned on indulgence. The officer laid out what it meant in legal terms. Theft of that scale was no small matter. Papers were pushed across the desk, charges written in black and white. Words like felony and restitution filled the air, cold and final. My sister tried to argue, saying she never meant for it to go so far, that she thought she could fix it before anyone noticed. Her voice cracked, desperation bleeding through, but the officer didn't bend. My mother murmured weak apologies, her hands trembling as she twisted her wedding ring. None of it changed the facts. Then came the cuffs. The sound of metal closing shut around their wrists echoed louder than the officer's words. Watching them led away was like watching the last pieces of my family fracture and fall apart. My father's shoulders sagged, though his face stayed hard, and I sat frozen, unable to move. That night, under the blinding lights of the station, the final layer of denial was stripped away. The people I should have trusted most had been the ones to break me. and there was no way to pretend otherwise anymore. Courtrooms have a way of making people small. The high ceilings, the hard benches, the echo of footsteps, it all pressed down on us as the hearings began. My mother and sister sat before the judge, their lawyers whispering in their ears, their eyes heavy with shame. The charges were read clearly, every word cutting deeper. It was no longer whispers in a dining room or quiet talk in a police station. It was official, permanent, written into record. Neither of them wanted a trial. The evidence was overwhelming, and dragging it further would only make the damage worse. They accepted deals that would keep them out of prison, but tie them to punishment they couldn't escape. Probation stretched out over years, with check-ins and restrictions that would shadow them daily. Financial counseling was ordered, a reminder of how far they had fallen. Most painful of all was the demand that every missing dollar be repaid, no matter how long it took. The reality of repayment was grim. The car Bryn had paraded around was taken back by the bank. Clothes, handbags, jewelry, all sold off at a loss, the shine gone once desperation touched them. The total scraped together was a fraction of what had been taken, a few stacks of bills where there should have been security for a future. The rest would come slowly, pulled from paychecks year after year, a constant reminder of their choices. I watched my father through it all. His anger was steady, not loud anymore but deep and unmoving. The man who once defended his family at all costs now looked at them like strangers. After the sentencing, he met with his lawyer. Papers were drawn up, signatures placed on documents that redrew the future of our family. His home, his savings, his plans for what would come after he was gone, all shifted to my name. He said nothing as he made the change, but his silence said more than words could. When he finally spoke to them, his voice was flat. He told them they had no place in his life anymore. There was no screaming, no dramatic outburst, just a door closing quietly but firmly. My mother cried softly, Bryn begged for forgiveness, but he did not move. His decision was final. Leaving the courthouse, the air outside felt different. The sky was clear, the city buzzing with normal life, but for us everything had changed. They walked in one direction, heads down, while my father and I went the other, a gap opening that would never close again. Their world shrank fast. Without the house and the comfort they once flaunted, my mother and Bryn ended up in a small apartment with peeling paint and thin walls. Friends who used to orbit around them disappeared, calls went unanswered, and invitations never came again. The silence around them was louder than any gossip. For me, the weight of what had happened didn't lift easily. Even with the funds my father had given me still secure, it felt strange to use them. The money carried shadows, and every time I touched it, I remembered the betrayal. Yet I couldn't let it sit idle. I needed to build something, not just for myself, but to prove I was more than the damage they left behind. I found a loft downtown, a wide open floor with tall windows and brick walls. It was raw and intimidating, but when I walked across the dusty boards, I could already picture it filled with sketches, mood boards, and long tables crowded with materials. I signed the lease before I had time to second guess. The first weeks were grueling. Contractors came and went, wires were replaced, walls painted, floors polished. I stayed on site from morning until long after midnight, fueled by takeout and coffee. My hands were blistered from helping with tasks I didn't need to do, but I wanted to touch every corner, to know that when the studio came alive, I had shaped it myself. When the furniture arrived, the space transformed. Desks lined the walls, shelves carried supplies, and light streamed through the windows onto blank canvases waiting to be filled. For the first time since the chaos began, I felt the stirrings of excitement. This wasn't about lost money anymore. It was about creating something no one could take. Work consumed me. I poured myself into projects with a kind of hunger I had never felt before. Ideas came faster, my designs sharper, as though the betrayal had burned away hesitation and left only determination. Days blurred into nights, but I welcomed the exhaustion. Every hour spent there pulled me further from the bitterness and closer to something solid. I named it Vance Designs. Seeing the name on the door gave me a sense of pride I couldn't explain. It wasn't just a studio. It was proof that even when family tore me down, I could stand back up on my own terms. 1 year changed everything. What started as an empty loft was now a studio buzzing with life. The desks were never clear, covered with drawings, models, and laptops glowing late into the night. Clients walked in with hesitation and left with confidence, shaking my hand as if they knew my company would deliver. The work spoke for itself, and soon word spread faster than I expected. When the hotel deal came through, it felt like proof I belonged in this field. They wanted a full rebrand, logos, interior themes, everything. I threw myself into it, sketching ideas until my hands cramped. Seeing my designs later across their buildings and brochures made my chest swell with pride. Not long after, a magazine featured the project, my name printed under glossy photos. Holding that issue in my hands was surreal. For the first time, I felt seen outside my own circle. Through all of this, my father stood beside me. He came by the studio often, not to interfere but to watch, to smile, to tell me he was proud. Aunt Margot was the same, steady as ever, always reminding me to celebrate the victories instead of rushing past them. Our Sunday dinners became a ritual. Simple meals, honest conversation, no shadows lurking at the edges. Those evenings healed more than I realized at first. News of my mother and Bryn reached me in fragments. A friend mentioned spotting Bryn behind the counter of a clothing store, her forced smile thin and tired. Another said my mother was working part-time for a small office, balancing ledgers for barely enough to pay rent. Their world had shrunk into something ordinary, nothing like the polished image they once chased. The restitution checks trickled in, stiff pieces of paper that never covered much. Sometimes $20, sometimes $50. I deposited them, not for the money but for what they represented. Each one reminded me of the line they crossed, and how far I had come since. My own days were filled with deadlines and new opportunities. I met with architects, collaborated with local artists, and hired a small team who believed in my vision. We stayed late often, music playing as we worked, laughter echoing in the space that once felt too big. Slowly, the studio grew into something that felt less like survival and more like a future. Looking around at what I had built, I realized this was more than a company. It was my independence, my answer to betrayal, and the clearest proof that their choices had not broken me. The city lights glowed against the glass as I stood in my studio, the space quiet after a long day of work. Papers and sketches covered the tables, reminders of how far I had come. The money my sister stole was long gone, but what remained with me was a sharper clarity than I ever had before. Their choices had ripped away illusions I didn't know I was living under. I once believed family meant safety, trust, and loyalty, but I had learned those bonds could break as easily as glass. It was painful, but it forced me to see the truth of who they were and who I needed to be without them. The studio around me wasn't just walls and desks. It was proof that I had taken what was left and built something lasting. My life no longer revolved around what I had lost, but around what I had created. Each project completed, each client satisfied, was a quiet victory that belonged only to me. I thought of Bryn and my mother sometimes, but not with the same anger as before. Their downfall was their own making, and I carried no desire to drag them further down. My father and Aunt Margot were enough. They gave me strength, honesty, and company without lies. That was the family I still had. Looking out at Denver's skyline, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. They could not touch this. They could not undo the work, the name, or the independence I had claimed. Their betrayal would never define me. My success, my calm, and my freedom were things they could never take away. Do you think I made the right choice by walking away from my mother and sister forever, or should I have given them another chance? Share your thoughts in the comments. I really want to know what you think. And if you'd like to hear more of my stories, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next one.